If you've ever looked at drop off in your user funnel and asked yourself, wait, why is this happening? This conversation is for you. I'm Mark Garcia, and you're listening to the Product Builders Podcast. Joining me today is Andrew Tunall, the president and CPO of Embrace. Andrew has helped define how we understand performance, not just from a technical lens, but from a real world user focused perspective. We're breaking down observability, how telemetry connects to product and user experience, and why the smartest teams are using this data to design better experiences. Andrew, welcome to the show. I always like to start things off by letting my guests introduce themselves. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself before we dive into this?
Sure, Mark. Thanks. That was a lovely intro. Get it better than I think I could have.
I tried.
Andrew, you kind of said it. I lead most of the organization operationally at Embrace. I've been there about 3 years. After I did a 4.5 year stint at New Relic. Before that, I was at AWS for almost 4 years. So I mean, I lead everything from our go-to-market efforts to our product and technology teams. Really excited to be here today.
Awesome. And can you share a bit about your journey and how you landed into where you are today?
Yeah. So it's kind of it's a long story at this point. I guess I'm dating myself. But like I got into technology, I guess today what we would call product management, when back before product management was really a thing in technology teams. Maybe there were probably some companies in the Bay Area doing like with product managers, but it was very early days, like very early 2000s. I got hired as a project manager, in large part because I had an interesting skill set. I graduated with a bachelor's in economics and political science, but I was a minor in computer science. And honestly, I'd spend most of like my days growing up, monkeying around with computers, writing code. I was like, a friend of mine who ended up graduating from Stanford and I built like text-based multiplayer games and stuff like that. So I knew the fundamentals of the kind of computer science world. And we'll talk about it a little bit more today. And I think that it's an understated quality of good product managers, but like that gave me a really broad like reservoir of knowledge and the ability to speak common languages and empathize with everyone from like the software engineers that worked on our own teams to our customers to what we then called the business, right? Like the notion of like the people who had the ideas. I did that for a few years. I eventually went into agile consulting and like more agile product management, product ownership. Worked for a few startups, and eventually I ended up getting hired by Amazon Web Services. And from there, it kind of blossomed. I was at AWS when it was growing like now. I mean, I think we grew from like 5,000 employees to nearly 100,000 employees by the time I left. 5 or 6x the business, the stock price 10x, like all of course my doing. No, I'm just kidding. Is a very small part. Like I was technical PM number 100 at AWS, and there's thousands now. So I was there a long time ago. And then I ended up getting hired by New Relic to build their cloud observability practice, which I did. Eventually left as a VP there across observability experiences and decided to make the leap back into the startup world. There's lots of reasons to join a startup. Like to get rich is a really bad one.
I know that.
But the biggest reason you join a startup is that they're pretty unique in terms of pace and ability to learn a skill set and a depth of knowledge that is hard to get when you're just a cog in the wheel in a big company. And my resume was absent of very executive leadership experience, and so it made sense for me to jump and learn what it meant to be kind of at the helm of a company and driving strategy. As I look toward what the rest of my career looks like.
Yeah, I also jumped ship from a cog in a wheel to small companies, so I fully empathize with what it means to dive headfirst into a role, particularly at a startup. But super interesting to hear your background and how it has shaped your perspective. And you definitely bring a unique lens to product leadership that's combining both this technical expertise and different focuses. So that brings us to where I want to start things off today. What does all of this actually mean? So telemetry and observability can sound like intimidating terms, especially if you're not familiar with them or if you're not an engineer or you've just maybe never heard of them before. So I want to start from the top and start by defining some of these terms for our audience.
Sure.
So what is telemetry in the
Yeah.
context of digital products?
Yeah. I mean, I'll say in the context of observability and monitoring, because really, to like the word telemetry really is just any data, right, emitted that is diagnostic about what's going on in your app. In our context, it's performance telemetry. So we're acutely interested in what we can measure in terms of how your code executes, whether or not it emits errors, whether there are like noticeable bits of payload information that would be um, useful in troubleshooting a particular issue. Um, Under the guise of like, if think of it like what's happening in the computer inside your car, which is that as you drive down the freeway, everything's working just fine, and maybe there's some like minor changes to what's going on in the engine nowadays, and compiling all of that information, that diagnostic data, was quite useful to the automotive shop that now doesn't go like pull up the hood. They actually plug in a computer to your car and it tells them all of the information it's recorded about what's been going on with your car or truck, so that they can actually more rapidly troubleshoot it.
Got it. And then you did touch on this a bit, but observability, the second half of this, how would you explain that to someone else who
Yeah, so
is
I mean, the
unfamiliar with it?
concept here, right, is that like in the more classic way that teams approached monitoring, they basically defined the things that they would care about. They had to know that you would have low tire pressure in your truck, or that like the engine timing might be off, or the cylinder pressure would be off. That works when you have relatively like simple software or a few things that can break. I think nowadays, forward-looking teams are, even in the mobile world, which is traditionally quite slow compared with like backend services. We see teams shipping multiple times a week where they're trying to
Yep.
turn around an app release in like a couple days or an hour. One of our larger customers, the New York Times, their mantra is like technology at the speed of the news, which like if
Right.
a worldwide event happens, the app release they're going to want to ship so that you can explore the data doesn't have the luxury of like a 6 to 12 week QA cycle, right? They're shipping it
Yeah.
out within hours. And so as like that complexity increases, that fundamentally means that there are like fewer things you can anticipate that would go wrong. And the concept around observability is, can you use the data, the telemetry emitted by your app, to answer questions where you discover either you need to go instrument something further, or you can infer what actually happened in the app with the data there. And, I think as we think about the future of observability when it comes to user experiences, which is really what, our business is, I think about it as the science as to whether or not you can tell whether or not performance impacted like otherwise intended user behavior, which is like if you go change something about your user experience that you think will drive more positive conversion, and it goes through a series of activities in the app, can you actually tell whether or not the code you wrote has materially the same performance as it did or not? Because I don't know about you, but like, depending upon how sticky I am to a particular app experience, if you introduce a lot of latency, I like perceive it as broken or not working, and I'm much more likely to voluntarily leave, even though I might actually love the underlying concept of the product you delivered. And it's just because people's like attention spans and patience is just gone out the window as we've delivered essentially like instant gratification in the palm of our hands.
Yeah, that was a really great way of describing everything. And you touched on it. One of the questions I had, and maybe we could expand on it, is how do these concepts of telemetry and observability, how do they differ from kind of traditional analytics or reporting tools that are a bit more uh, common, if you will, or that people are more familiar with?
Yeah, and I mean, there's obviously like a whole spectrum of stuff, right? Like as you look
Right.
across like front end, you have like what I'll call the basics, right? And in the mobile world, there's even free. Like Google publishes a product called Firebase Crashlytics that gives you a lot of data just about crashes, and crashes are like your engine blew up, right? It's materially bad, like everything has gone wrong. There's no spectrum to how bad it is, because if your app crashes, it closes and you have to restart your experience.
Right.
So there's like crash analysis, and that's in a very, very tactical level, all the way to more like user experience type analysis in terms of like visual replays. There's the traditional product analytics suites like Amplitude, Pendo, etc., that are tracking click activity and trying to see whether or not you did the things that I think you're going to do because I'm trying to manipulate your behavior. We kind of lie somewhere in the middle, which is like
Okay.
we're not we're not the like materially bad problems. Of course, like our product has that in it, right? Like we're giving you insights into things like crashes because it's kind of table stakes. But what we're really trying to do is get people to go measure and improve all of the things that have a spectrum of how poorly they can go. So those are things
Okay.
like, when you return a bunch of flights into your app and it starts pulsing because it's trying to figure out the order that it loads them, did that load in a timely manner for you so that you stay engaged with the content? When you initiate your app, like what are all the if you go implement a new monetization SDK that introduces a lot of latency, what does that performance impact do to your user engagement? We're not really trying to tell, do they like your app, right? Like I
Right.
can't, with our data, we don't know whether they like the product or not. We're not even trying to tell you how long did they spend exploring or like doing things or clicking around. That's the world of product analytics. What we're trying to tell you is like, given otherwise like predictable user behavior or ideal user behavior, does your code execute in a way that makes it progressively more likely people will have a good experience?
That's awesome. And you gave a few examples there. New York Times was really interesting because, of course, speed of news. I know that tagline, but when you consider everything going on, I'm sure there's a lot that they need to accommodate for. Can you give us just any more real examples of how telemetry and this type of data has helped teams improve user experiences and performances and feature updates?
Yeah, I mean, you think of all the things that a modern app has going on. We do a lot of really interesting stuff around, especially with what we've done with Open Telemetry, to allow teams to build really strong, like startup time profiling. So
Okay.
we have some default instrumentation that will go in and actually measure how long it takes from the moment you start the app in whatever state you are. So that could be a cold start because the app is been completely terminated and the OS says the process isn't alive, to a warm start because you've been interacting with it for a while. But like people do all sorts of stuff during there, right? They fetch a profile, they might fetch config information, they might have third-party SDKs that are doing product analytics on you or marketing attribution or handling deep links or doing ad monetization. And like today's mobile teams in and I would say this is true with web as well, like as digital products become more and more complex, teams have gotten bigger and more complex too, right? You have teams working on individual modules. You have teams collaborating across common areas with like handoffs. You have, I mean, post pandemic, right? Like you have remote employees, and so like the traditional guardrails you had where people could stand around a whiteboard and easily collaborate things kind of go out the window, and so that complexity, more and more necessitates a language where as you ship fast and inevitably break things, you discover them quickly because you have a really coherent observability approach. And that kind of translates to a whole variety of things you can think of that would happen through the app. Everything from, how do I, as somebody scrolls vertically through my app where I'm progressively loading issue and things are hanging or janking, like how do I actually go profile that and fix it so that people have a positive experience, to quite simple stuff. And I talked a little bit at the beginning about language, but it's like, think about the how meaningful it is in your organization if engineers can just talk about a problem with common knowledge of the problem. So like
Right.
instead of somebody saying, we're getting bad app store reviews because when people click on this box, it doesn't work. They say, hey, like we can see this box is resulting in a lot of errors. We believe it's this particular request to your service. Did something change recently with that service that has resulted in the elevated error rates? And they can actually collaborate around the problem as peers using kind of common knowledge, as opposed to everyone just shrugging and saying everything looks fine from my end, cannot reproduce, which is like I remember like, as a C-level leader, it's like the most infuriating words, like cannot reproduce, because like it's not like people get their jollies just by submitting like tickets to your support team saying, my app is crashing, or like this thing doesn't work that I'm trying to do. They put some time and effort into telling you it's broken, and everyone's just kind of shrugging their shoulders so they don't have any answers.
I laugh because I know that pain point of getting QA tickets or doing it myself or trying to resolve something. And it's literally just a week of like, I can't replicate the issue, trying to figure out how do you replicate a bug. You spend more time trying to find the bug before you even fix the bug. So totally understand that. And one additional question here, I guess, when is the right time for a team to start thinking about implementing this type of stuff? Is it just for later stage, more mature products? Can anyone do it really at any point in their life cycle?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a super pertinent question, because especially now, as more and more early stage companies utilize AI to build early
Mhm.
versions of their app, um, like I think the answer used to be probably when you start to reach some modicum of scale, because like startup costs to building something new were quite expensive, right? You had to have engineers just to build the foundational elements, and um, why would you introduce another 10 or 20% overhead to your overall costs of running an app when you have very little certainty that you'll have market success? Um, I think now, like, the answer has changed, because in the absence as teams ship stuff more rapidly, the only way you know whether or not your experiment is valid is whether or not you can tell that it's actually working. You're evaluating the like product idea at face value. Which is to say, like, it'd be very, you could have a brilliant idea. If implemented poorly, nobody's going to like it, even if it's the most brilliant thing on earth. And
Exactly.
this is like, we're not talking, I think, traditionally, when you're thinking about agile and you talked about like minimum viable products and stuff like that, that either assumes like a massive white space that's like a completely unsolved problem that people are willing to tolerate, like a level of cruddiness to the experience that they will just kind of like suspend their dissatisfaction with what you've done just simply to solve the problem. Or it's like you're going to be iterating and people are kind of bought in on collaborating with you. Today's like especially now with AI, I mean, today's consumer world is just like brutal. Like nobody's going to be willing to just, there's not enough white space anymore where if you do a crummy job, you have some sort of moat around your idea for more than a day or two before somebody replicates it and does twice the job. So if you can't tell that your app is like actually doing the things you built successfully, you can't really evaluate whether or not the thing you built is a good idea to begin with. And I think my larger belief is that in the user experience world, for a long time, we've been looking at kind of experiments and product ideas and saying, oh, this didn't work. And largely we don't know why. Like we know what people aren't doing, but we don't know why they're not doing it. We can't get in their heads because they don't talk to us. We don't have the instrumentation to tell whether or not the product is working. Maybe we didn't have enough traffic to begin with to like have an accurate sample size. And so, I think unless you kind of stumble into something to get all of those things right, a lot of times it makes it very difficult to effectively iterate because you're not actually doing it scientifically.
Yeah, that was a great breakdown of like some complex ideas, and I love how you framed some of that defining and insight into everything that you do. But moving on from here, I do want to shift a little bit. So now we have a definition, we know what these terms are. I want to talk about why they matter, especially for folks in product and design and business roles, because it isn't just about fixing crashes, right? It's about
Yeah.
building smarter, building better products. So I'd say historically, performance data has lived with mostly, I'd say, the engineering teams and that department of product design. Why is that changing now, and why do you see it becoming more accessible to other departments and cross team and entire product teams?
Yeah. Well, I think the first reason is scale. Like, as you look at like consumer internet technology today, mobile, whether it's mobile web or native mobile, like absolutely dominates how people engage with the internet. For those of us who like used to have normal computers, even pre like laptop days, doing everything on our mobile device is kind of a challenge. Like I do a lot on my mobile device, but like if I need to get serious work done, I still sit down and I use my laptop, my large screen set. Um, my daughter's generation, like I don't even know that they'll use laptops. I mean, they'll have some sort of Neuralink or something into their phone, and it'll just like they'll conjure up what they want to happen. But I think like the point being that like consumer internet has way more usage than was imaginable 10, 15 years ago when we started this whole like digital transformation journey that was the buzzword for a long time in the observability world. Um, and so like that natural level of engagement has necessitated that people start seeking out ways to make 1, 2, 3% differences in engagement, because the total number of visitors they're seeing means that like a 3% increase in engagement time, and if half of those people end up making a buying decision, it's pretty material increase in like overall activity, especially because like a lot of consumer brands are online only. So like if you could make a 1.5% increase for a week or two worth of your engineering team's work, is that like more or less material than a new feature? And I think traditionally speaking, it was tough to figure that out. Like my hope is that this making it more democratized to those teams means that they can have a more serious conversation about the work that they prioritize to make the biggest impact to the business.
Yeah, that's great. And then not to date ourselves, but the idea of something being a desktop task versus a mobile task. I've had that conversation with a lot of friends. I'm one of those people that will fully go to a desktop for certain
Yeah,
activities.
yeah.
So,
Like,
but speaking of democratizing data, and because I come from more of the creative background, UX UI,
yeah.
can you speak to how this kind of data impacts product design and like design decision making and user
Yeah,
experience?
I would say it's not just design, right? As you think
Okay.
about full stack engineering, not just front end engineering, I'm a big believer that having common data sets and thinking about a problem with like all of the information at your disposal produces the best overall system design decisions. Which is to
Mm,
say, like, if you think about a UX pattern that you could contemplate, if you do not care at all about any of the implementation details, you could come up with some wild stuff that is virtually impossible for the engineers to actually deliver in a way that performs consistent with user expectations, right? And so think about it this way, like if you had telemetry across your entire app and you knew that your customers start disengaging seriously when any interaction takes more than a second and a half or 2.5 seconds.
mhm.
If you go design a user interaction pattern that's fundamentally going to result in an interaction that takes 5.5 seconds, you'd be crazy to do it, because like all of your data tells you that the users aren't going to suffer through another 3 seconds of wait time in order to see your magic. They don't care. They don't know what's going to happen. And so they just
Yeah.
start abandoning ship because they assume your app is broken or like their attention span doesn't allow them to do it. And so like I think the problem historically is like, you would have design come up with this idea, product management would look at it and be like, okay, my engineers are telling me that this is going to take too long. By the time everyone gets their hands in it, they completely water it down and it becomes like a shell of what it originally was, or it's some, alternative implementation that actually is a complete mismatch with how you were thinking about designing the experience in its entirety. And so like what if you had access to that data and you could understand the I guess boundary conditions that you need to design it. In fact, I'd go beyond that. What if you could actually design appropriately to that and say, we know that we have to keep it under 2.5 seconds. So we're going to create a storyboard for our users that keeps the interactions sticky to them so that we keep pushing them along in the funnel appropriately. That becomes really empowering to teams to do the right thing and actually build experiences their users love.
Yeah, I know you said it earlier in terms of being able to create this common knowledge base across teams. And then hearing your example just now really hit it home for me. I mean, I've sat in meetings and conversations where it's like I'm talking to a PM who's then talking to a dev who's talking to a stakeholder. And you basically playing a game of telephone trying to fix some sort of bug or come up with a UX solution when if you all just had all the information from the start, how much more time would you have saved sitting
Yeah,
across 10 different meetings?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that makes a lot of sense. And on the flip side, what kind of blind spots might product teams have if they're not looking at this kind of data?
Yeah,
Um,
I kind of touched on it a little bit ago, but like I would hypothesize that most teams who are doing any element of experimentation or A/B testing or like progressive rollouts, etc., lack a pretty significant piece of like information when it comes to figuring out whether or not their release is successful, not from a do people like the feature, but did it just, as you know, I had a customer say the other day, our first mandate is do no harm to their performance, because it's really difficult for us to tell whether or not, you know, somebody likes what you did unless you have met the same bar in terms of the application's performance. And you know, and it's not just the historic signals. It's not just those crashes or the things Google punishes you for on the ANR thresholds. I mean, I think I heard a VP at DoorDash say, like, there's more than just crashes that'll make you throw your phone against the wall. It's like,
Yeah.
you know, especially in their world, right? You think about like, I get these Uber Eats notifications all the time, right? That's like, hey, there's a deal, $20 off when you spend $50 or more on your next Uber Eats notification. Like, I got 2 young children, so it'd be very tough for us to spend $50 or more on Uber Eats. But like, I digress. Like, if you hit the notification and it doesn't work, like when it pops up to the restaurant that you've actually responded to, and it goes to like a totally different restaurant, or the app fails to load in that state and just goes back to the landing screen, like, are you likely to keep pursuing that offer to go do the thing, right? Like, I think there's just this entire world of data that if you don't know exactly what's happening, it makes it very difficult to make objective decisions. And most teams just don't have the information at their hands. They haven't gone to the point of actually measuring all of the things so that they can decide where exactly to improve.
Yeah, and I'd say data can sound intimidating sometimes, especially with, you have data scientists and it sounds like such a complex idea. And so I've seen teams where you have designers or whoever it might be saying, that's not really my lane. I don't need the data. How would you recommend product teams begin to collaborate with this type of data and start having that kind of cross team understanding and start having these conversations when there can be such siloed departments within a company?
Yeah. So assuming that and this is like a big thing, it's a big assumption. This is something we work on with our customers every day, which is assuming you can correlate the data between sources. Because I'm realistic. You'll have qualitative feedback from user experience. You'll have product analytics data. You might have replays. Maybe you have observability data. You have backend teams, etc. But assuming you can correlate that and create a common experience, it's really about like how do you build a culture of collaboration around these teams where they take the data at their disposal to figure out what the right answer is for your users, instead of just using opinions that have no data at all. Which is to say, like, you don't need to, know definitively that like this user is going to do XYZ, but if you know that your engagement time goes down when you introduce latency and you have the data at your disposal, you can make a compelling argument in concert with design that you need to adjust your design patterns to avoid latency. You can work with your service teams to have an SDK implementation or a service implementation that doesn't query as many results or progressively queries them, so that you can load information to people's eyeballs faster, right?
Mm.
I think too often we deal with fragmented data sources or people with part of the puzzle, and it just turns into a little bit of a pissing match in terms of like who is right and who's wrong, rather than what can we objectively look at and how can we make, the smartest decision for our end user.
It's exciting from a product design perspective or just product perspective in general to just imagine how much more aligned teams can be when everyone's working from the same insights. So thank you for sharing that. So you've talked about implementing these types of platforms, telemetry and observability across teams. What does that actually look like in practice? And can you talk about, what it looks like to go from not having this at all and then the baby steps into actually implementing it and getting teams up to speed with this on like a scalable and a way they can maintain?
Yeah. So I think there are like 2 things that trigger this change, right? So I mentioned it a little bit. But over the past 10 to 15 years, I remember when I first joined New Relic, which was early 2018, so like 7-8 years ago. Like for a few years and into those years, that all the rage, the big buzzword amongst CTOs and CIOs was digital transformation, right? This notion of like, we're going to go from all of our legacy systems and doing business to a digital first way of doing business. And in the observability world, what that really meant was instrumenting all of their servers, their clusters, their, Kubernetes nodes, applications with data. And they optimized for their API, which was really the way that their technology spoke to their applications and their application teams. And I hypothesize that it's largely because like the people who were complaining were the engineers building the website who couldn't load data in a very fast way. And so they knew kind of objectively, we need to serve data to them in a meaningfully fast way so that they can do it in a way that is perceptively fast. I say perceptively fast because that's not objectively fast. I have no way of knowing whether your users actually expect it to be faster or slower. Like we don't know because we weren't measuring it. But like that's kind of where the digital transformation journey ended. And so I guess my crusade right now is to get companies to realize that your API to your end users is actually the things you build into your app. And if you can't measure that performance, the type of latency or issues that cause disengagement, you're not actually figuring out what the impact of your technology is to your end users. Using API endpoints as a proxy and saying, hey, it's good enough when it gets to the website isn't actually good enough in a increasingly competitive environment, in an environment where AI is going to necessitate that companies iterate and release code faster than they ever have before, that often goes through fewer release cycles or has automated tests written by the computers that just wrote the broken code. And like, it's, AI will get better and better and better. But like, I just had, my daughter who's 8 years old loves to do these quizzes, but I had OpenAI tell me that like in a 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11 series, that the right answer to 11 was in fact 12. And it's like, if it's getting like simple math wrong, like it's going to make mistakes, right? And if you don't have the data, if even in an AI assisted world, if you don't have the measurement data to tell whether or not you just made a seemingly minor mistake that actually had really big impacts to user disengagement, I pushed out an experiment to 1% of my users, but I broke the calendar control, which means I can't select when I want to leave my home airport. So 100% of those people stopped converting. How do you really know whether or not you have a reliability issue in your user experience or not? And I think, so to me, it's like the evolution is how do we introduce this notion of user behavior, the actual engagement data we have, and that the thing that your app was intended to do is a reliability signal for technology teams. And then once you have that, right, it's about how they collaborate to build better and more resilient systems.
That's great. And I've got one more question here, and it's come up a bit throughout this conversation. AI, right? It's changing how we work at all stages of product. Are you really particularly excited about anything in terms of AI or maybe any other emerging technologies as it pertains to kind of your world of data? Anything to look out for? Anything that you kind of really see coming down the line that we should be on the watch for?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole array of things. I guess I'll answer it a little bit differently. I'll tell you how we use AI internally with like our own product and technology teams, which is it's been a like complete game changer for us in terms of rapid prototyping, which is like, coming from a design background, this will totally click in, which is, let's say a product manager has a really set of inspiring conversations, or an engineer has this inspiring set of conversations with some customers. They're onto a problem. They really want to play with the problem space. A lot of people struggle to understand exactly what we're trying to achieve unless they have some sort of visual artifact. And so historically, like a PM would go write a requirements document or like try to explain to a designer what it was in their head from this conversation with a customer. And then, you'd play telephone for like 4 to 6 weeks until a mock that was like 50% there came out. And then another 4 to 6 weeks to get something that you would then go get back to customers. Now, like we can crank out a pretty dang good version of that, even if it doesn't look like our product, but it functionally kind of does the type of stuff that it would do, and insights that are based on trivialized data in like hours. And the power that gives people to just iterate through the ideas and then spend more time thinking through. I actually think it's empowering for designers, because now you get to think through the actual interactions as opposed to just the like basics of what the functionality is. Has been a total game changer for us in terms of just getting much more advanced in how we evaluate ideas with customers.
Great, and I definitely can empathize with that one in terms of at first it was really hard for me to picture how do you have AI facilitate and fold into the UX process. But likewise, it can really do a lot of things like go through a lot of data, give me kind of key highlights instead of me doing manual work there, and I can focus my time more on the creative bits of
Yeah.
product design. So thank you for sharing. And I know we're coming on time here. Before I wrap things up, I always like to do a quick fire segment to leave our listeners with something actionable. I'm going to throw, let's say, 2 or 3 statements your way. Want a quick take on them? No long explanations, just kind of a gut take here. Let's see. Uh, what is one myth about observability that you'd love to just debunk?
Yeah, I'd say so maybe it's not about observability, but it's about like software quality and reliability, which is that like you can't there's no such thing as a front end emergency and you'll catch most stuff in QA. Like I think that's just fundamentally untrue, especially as complexity of software goes up and that pace of iteration increases.
Great. And then speaking of data, what is one KPI that more product teams should definitely pay attention to?
Oh yeah. th- I think so I mean this is like top of the list of what we are talking about, but I think it really is like engagement on your key activities. Think about your the thing if you went out and listed off 15 key things that your product does, like tasks that your users accomplish in your app, um, whether or not they're successful, they fail, or whether or not they disengage and why they disengage is like a key metric for you, right? Like, if you don't understand the difference between them not engaging because the product doesn't work and them not engaging because they don't like the product, you don't know where to spend your time.
That's a good one. I'll do one last one here, a bit more personal. What's one leadership lesson you've learned the hard way?
Ah, yeah. Okay. I thought so. This is advice that I wish I could have given myself numerous times over the past 20 years. But you can be right and not right. And what I mean by that is that like the companies we work in, like they're complex places with lots of reasons that people make decisions, not all of which may be like abundantly clear to us. And sure, we've all had to suffer a fool once or twice, but broadly speaking, I assume most people in most of the organizations we work for are pretty smart people who are making decisions because they're using the best information they have available to them to do what's right for themselves and the business in a complex, you go look at a company the size of Amazon's, AWS is 100,000 employees. It's a complex place. And it's not always simple as looking through like a lens of black and white. There's many shades of gray. And so you can believe you have the right answer, but it might not be the right time. It might not be that like the political capital to make this decision in the organization exists. It may be that customers have threatened to churn if you make that decision. And like the business is in a revenue place where making the right long-term decision isn't necessarily a possibility. And so like I think, understanding kind of when to go to the mat and like when to fight versus when to say, hey, like this is a complex decision. Let me understand the context for why the decision's being made. It's something you got to learn.
That is a great one to end on. Thank you for sharing. I definitely feel that one hits close to home. Before we go, we like to wrap things up with what we call our Majesytk Bite. If our listeners can walk away from this conversation with one key takeaway from the episode, Andrew, what would you share as your bite?
Yeah. Key takeaway. I mean, I think like I mentioned it a couple of times, but like, I guess I'll just reiterate, right? If you can't tell the difference between if your users are staying engaged because your app is working as intended or because they don't like the product, there's no way for you effectively to like actually go about experimenting with user behavior. So if you care about experimentation and iteration, make sure you measure your performance data so that you can then make product decisions with eyes wide open.
Awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Where can people go to learn more about you or Embrace? Any links you want to promote right now?
Sure. So our website's www.embrace.io. It's probably the best place to go learn about Embrace. But our social media person is pretty funny. And so if you go on our LinkedIn profile or our various other socials and search for like Embrace Mobile, you'll find us. We've got the like weird bracketed with the two dots. It's like the Embrace face or whatever it is. Um, Probably best place to follow me just from a like me kind of sharing ideas is on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having such a great conversation and for breaking things down in a way that felt really approachable and useful for everyone listening. We will link to Embrace and everything else you just mentioned in the show notes. And for those of you tuning in, thanks always for listening. If you found this episode helpful, give us a follow, leave a review, share it with someone on your team who is building complex, high touch spaces like this one. And this is the Product Builders Podcast. We'll see you next time.